The laws of the Roman Emperor Justinian were instruments of power and faith. They sought to build a single, unified Christian empire under God and his chosen ruler. Within this grand project, one law, Novel 146, laid out a specific and audacious aim for the empire's Jewish subjects. The law stated its purpose with stark clarity. It demanded that Jewish communities read their holy scriptures not just in Hebrew but in Greek but in Latin. The intention was not simply to make the texts more accessible. The law explicitly commanded that they search the sacred words for their deeper, hidden meaning for the prophecies that the Christian state insisted pointed directly toward Jesus. This was a profound intervention. The emperor was not merely regulating commerce or punishing crime. He was attempting to direct the spiritual lives of his subjects to reshape their very understanding of their own ancient faith. The law expressed a hope, or rather a command, that a new way of reading would lead to a new belief. At the heart of Justinian's novel, 146, lay a prohibition against something the law termed deuterosis. This Greek word meaning second telling or repetition has been the subject of much scholarly debate but is widely understood to refer to the Jewish oral law. This was the vast and complex body of teachings, interpretations, legal rulings developed by rabbis over centuries to explain and apply the written law of the Torah. The most famous compilation of this oral tradition is the Mishnah, a foundational text completed around 200 CE. Mishnah, Gemara, together form the Talmud, the central guide to Jewish life and thought. For Rabbinic Judaism, the oral law was not an addition to the Torah, but an inseparable part believed given to Moses on Mount Sinai, alongside the written commandments. It was the key to understanding the practical application of God's law in daily life. The Mishnah provided guidance on agricultural practices, festival observances, civil disputes, family law. While the language of Novel 146 was forceful and its intent clear, many scholars question how effectively such a law could have been enforced. The idea of a state policing the private study and internal discussions of every Jewish community across a vast and diverse empire seems logistically daunting, if not impossible. For this reason, some historians, such as Albert Baumgarten, have argued that the law should be understood primarily as a symbolic act, a piece of imperial propaganda rather than a practical administrative tool. It was a declaration of Christian supremacy, a polemic written in the language of law, designed to assert the empire's theological position for all to see. In this reading, the ban on the deuterosis was less about stopping every Jew from studying the Mishnah and more about establishing an official ideological hierarchy. The law served as a public statement that the Christian interpretation of Scripture was the only one sanctioned by the state and that Rabbinic Judaism was a deviant and erroneous path. The decree functioned as a powerful piece of rhetoric, reinforcing the Christian identity of the empire and marking Jewish traditions as illegitimate within the imperial order. Section 4. Governing belief. Imperial reach into courts and synagogues. Justinian's legal interventions extended beyond scriptural interpretation into Jewish community structures. Courts, places of worship. The laws asserted that the Roman state had ultimate jurisdiction over all matters, even internal religious affairs. This was a significant expansion of imperial power. By claiming the right to rule on religious questions, the emperor positioned himself as final arbiter. Roman law presented itself as universal and absolute, leaving no sphere outside its reach. Sacred, secular. Not a simple move toward eradication. Paradoxically, the laws sought to control Jewish religious life while acknowledging its continued existence. Regulations for synagogues were a complex mix of restriction and protection. Section 5. The Shifting Sands of Law. Examples from the Codes. A close examination of specific legal changes reveals the nuanced and often contradictory nature of Justinian's policies. These were not always grand new pronouncements, but frequently involved subtle amendments to existing laws, reflecting a shifting imperial attitude. One telling example concerns the legal protections for synagogues. A law originally promulgated in 420 had established a clear principle. Synagogues were not to be burned or damaged without reason, and Jews were not to be subjected to undue persecution. This law was part of an earlier imperial framework that, while establishing Christianity's dominance, still afforded a baseline of protection to other recognized religious groups as a matter of public order. Another law, from the year 423, dealt with the punishment for those who attacked and plundered the property of Jews or peaceful pagans. The original penalty was severe. The perpetrators were required to restore thrice and fourfold the value of whatever was stolen or damaged. This harsh punishment signaled a strong state interest in preventing mob violence and maintaining social stability. However, when this law was incorporated into Justinian's code centuries later, a crucial change was made. The penalty was reduced. Section 6. A web of power. Lawmaking in a social context. To truly understand Justinian's laws, move beyond the image of an emperor issuing decrees from on high. The legal process in the Roman Empire was dynamic and interactive. According to Amnon Linder, imperial legislation often responded to a flow of information, petitions, pressures from the provinces. The imperial court in Constantinople was the center of a vast network connecting it to governors, bishops, wealthy landowners, community leaders across the Mediterranean. Laws were not simply proclaimed, they were forged in the crucible of social and political forces. Imperial laws concerning Jews were not always a single coherent master plan. They were often reactions to local situations, a dispute in a provincial town, a petition from a powerful bishop, a report from a governor about unrest, could all trigger a legal response from the capital. The emperor and his jurists would craft a law, or rescript, to address the particular issue. That response might be generalized into the legal code, but its origin was often local. Section 7. The Empire's Uneasy Compromise. Tension without resolution. The body of laws issued under Justinian ultimately presents a picture of profound and unresolved tension. On one side stood the emperor's grand vision of a perfectly unified Christian empire, a society where orthodox belief was the undisputed foundation of law, culture, and identity. This ambition drove the laws that sought to control Jewish scripture, limit the authority of rabbis, forbid the construction of new synagogues, and assert the state's power over every facet of religious life. These laws were instruments of an imperial ideology that aimed to demonstrate the truth of Christianity and the obsolescence of Judaism. On the other side was the complex reality of a diverse empire and the practical limits of imperial power. The laws had to contend with the continued existence of long-established Jewish communities. As a result, the legal code simultaneously contains provisions that recognize and, to a degree, protect Jewish existence. The state did not, for the most part, engage in outright, systematic persecution aimed at immediate annihilation. Instead, it regulated, contained, and managed. Laws continued to offer some protection against mob violence, and Jewish worship was taken for granted, even as it was being restricted. This inherent contradiction meant that no clear resolution was ever reached. The myth of a single, all-powerful emperor imposing his will is replaced by the complex reality of a state grappling with forces it could shape but never fully control.